Hey friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Welcome back to the Forward Rewind podcast. We are back, full cylinders running. Is that like a phrase? Is that a saying? How does it go? All cylinders firing. You know what, Gabe? You should probably just host a podcast from
That's okay. Winter came back and Blair just went on vacation.
I'm not going to lie. I did wake up and see the snow,
Yeah.
and it took everything in me not to cry in front of my kids.
I just got a new car yesterday.
Oh, congratulations.
Thinking that I had the opportunity to not have snow tires on my car anymore.
Yeah.
Kidding.
So now I'm
You should've
driving
known
very
better.
carefully today because
Yeah. Because
my insurance company will frown on me not having snow tires.
not to mention you have quite the drive too.
do, yeah.
What is it, 40 minutes or something?
No.
Oh, depends on
To Paris?
from here?
It's less than 20 minutes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh.
It's not that far.
Not from my house. When we go to Paris, it's kind of like 40 minutes.
Well, you have like a million stop
It is
lights
not-
between
Yeah, it's true.
It's
getting out of the city.
It takes me like 25 minutes to get from my house to Forward Kitchener.
Well, the last time we were in Paris, we took Steve's motorcycle. Remember?
I do remember that.
So
yeah.
maybe he was taking me on some back roads.
There's a good chance.
Tick me off. Anyway, the motorcycle has gone to a new home now, so we won't talk about that. Welcome to Pastor Kirk and Pastor Daryl. I am Blair Hicks, your host. Thanks for being patient. There was a lot of things that kind of drew our plans to podcast last week to a close.
Yeah.
Daryl being sick, or were you sick, or were you just you were needed?
I was needed
You were
elsewhere.
needed elsewhere.
Yes, yeah.
So there was a lot, but it's okay. We only had one texting question. So so to the person who texted in and was like, "Hey, there's no podcast. Don't worry, we've got you covered." And by we, I mean Daryl and Kirk too. So before we jump in, well, actually, this week we are talking about a really great topic. We're in our Search for Meaning series in Ecclesiastes still. I believe this is week 7. A meaningful life requires meaningful community. Some buzzwords that were floating around were like friendships, relationships, but community seemed to be that all-encompassing word that included all of that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It was a great topic, and I believe, Daryl, you talked a little bit about the different types of personalities, and like, don't worry, I'm not going to go all Enneagram on you guys, but like, you talked about introverts versus extroverts.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know what you guys are. Can I guess? Do you think
Sure,
I
you can guess.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Daryl, you can help me guess with Kirk. I think that Kirk, you're an introvert. Do you think he's an introvert?
Yeah, probably.
Are you an introvert?
If I was to go off my Myers-Briggs
Yes.
personality profile, I'm a slight extrovert.
Okay. What is that compared to introvert? Like, does that mean you kind of fall somewhere like,
No, I enjoy being around people. Like
Yeah.
I enjoy hanging out with people and being in spaces, but I also need my space.
okay.
So like I can really thrive being in conversations
Yeah.
and in meetings and hanging out with people and having a good time with friends, but there's like a limit.
Okay.
Where I
Have you
just
always
need
been
to-
like that? Or was there a time when you were like, did this change for you?
No, I would say that's pretty much the way I've always been.
Okay, that's interesting. I
Yep.
find that interesting because sometimes people can change. All right, Daryl, you are, what do you think, Kirk?
What do you think,
I
Blair?
I feel like I'm going to guess introvert for everybody. I think you're an introvert because you like,
Yeah, I think Daryl's an
I think you're an
introvert.
introvert. What are you? What would you say you are?
Oh, I say that I'm
If you're gonna,
both.
Okay.
In the sense that this is how a mentor of mine kind of put it one way. He's like, we can be extroverted, introverted when it comes to people and with work. So when it comes to a task, I would probably prefer to do that by myself. If I was given a task, I would
Right.
just be like, I'll go and I'll write that thing. I'll figure it out. I don't need to talk to anyone.
So you're
about
not a team player.
I'm not a team player, but I enjoy being around people.
Okay.
So if there are people, so here's the thing. If I had to work in a space, like an open office space, I would die because I would just want to talk with everyone.
Yeah,
I would
I
just be
get
like,
that.
how's your day going? Like, tell me,
I could guess
how's
that.
your weekend?
That's why around here
You put him in the back
phrase.
office?
No, we have a phrase around here. The phrase is "You've been Daryl'd."
Yeah. Tell me, so
Explain.
Just tell me like your deepest, darkest secret right now. Just like let's sit down and have a deep conversation. Or I just love being around in a big crowd of people, like similar to Kirk. Like there's a limit to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where I can hit a wall and I'll just be like, all right, I'm done. I've filled my quota.
Yeah.
But again, as my mentor would say, he's like, yeah, that's because you're not as his phrase would say, a foaming at the mouth extrovert.
Who is that?
Andrew Nunn.
Is
Andrew
that
Nunn.
what he said?
No, that's not who said it.
But
No.
Andrew Nunn is a foaming at the mouth extrovert for sure.
But my friend, my mentor, he would be, I would call it foaming at the mouth extrovert.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
that's all he wants is people.
Yes.
He's like, Daryl, even I have limits. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I haven't seen them yet. You seem to just
Oh.
love people. But I'm totally fine with closing the door and getting work done. And if anything, I have to do that. Otherwise, I will be distracted.
Yeah.
So
Where there are people, there will be Daryl talking. Is that what you mean?
yes.
Okay.
Let's hang out. Everyone-
Daryl says he wants a 5-minute conversation with you.
Book 45?
Yeah.
Okay.
Prepare for a 45-minute conversation.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Gabe, I'm going to go with introvert. Are you an introvert? You help with youth, though, so maybe you're an extrovert.
Yeah, no.
Can't decide.
I think it's more of Kirk.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
More like Kirk.
All right.
All right, I got it.
Blair,
all right, anybody
Blair,
want to
what
guess?
are you? What are you?
Want to guess?
Blair's an extreme introvert for sure.
Absolutely.
Like, there's no doubt.
You know those PD? Is it? How does it? What are those the PDI predictive index? PI. I work next to a company that's called PDI, so I went. Anyway.
Predictive index. Yes.
And the chart was like,
Yeah.
like
way over.
extremely, yeah.
That's shocking.
But you know what? I am an extrovert, but having kids brought an introverted part into my world.
Yeah, it would.
And because you're just never alone. So then when you are alone, you're like, this is magnificent. And then it just fills your bucket. So I am an extrovert. I do find I have a limit.
The other tests I like to have is, so one is how do you get work done is one way to figure it out. And then the other one is you have a day off. What do you want to do? What are you drawn to? Are you inviting 20 people over to your house? Are you trying to get rid of your kids to have some alone time?
Yeah, I would be like, who can I call?
See, I would invite my kids over to my house.
Yeah.
So it's not just 20 random people. It's like people close to me.
Yeah. So again, you're more center then.
But-
because it has to be close people.
But I want them gone within a certain period of time.
Do you say that? Do you say you can
Oh yeah,
come
no, there's
over?
like there's a family thing. We
Okay.
know. We know that there's like I've had times where they'll stay too long and I'm just
Yeah.
like, I'm going to bed.
Yeah,
You
bye.
guys see ya.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
You know
Steve-
where the door is.
Steve used to pinch me because I'm an extrovert and he used to be an extrovert or introvert. He's a lot more extroverted now. But if I was taking too long, it would look like he was affectionately putting his arm around me, but he was
Yep.
pinching.
Oh yeah, no, we have those visual cues as well. Yeah.
Are they less subtle? Are they like, scare a person on-
pretty much.
little tips, marriage tips we have for you. Don't ask Kirk or myself for some of those tips. All right, but we are getting to the good stuff now. Now that you know that if you want to hang out with somebody, call Daryl, and if you go to Kirk's house, be out at a certain hour.
That's right.
All right, so we're going to dive in here to a meaningful life that requires meaningful community, and we are going to talk more about relationships. Let's start with an overview of your message and the main takeaways. Why don't we start with Daryl?
All right. Yeah. So this week, I started off by talking about loneliness and kind of this idea. There's generally this idea out there right now that we're experiencing a bit of a loneliness epidemic. And I kind of pointed to this is not just out there in the world or in Canada, it does impact the church as well. And so throughout the message, I just want to talk through 3 lies that we end up believing about community, that doesn't matter, that it's too complicated and it's too dangerous. And if you end up believing one or more of these lies, you might end up pulling yourself away from community. But it's important to understand that community was designed by God, that through Scripture we see how we can have good community, which is meant to be authentic and tested. So it will take work, but because of grace that we both give and receive, community doesn't need to be a dangerous place for us.
Yeah, I like how you structured your message with like, you told us the 3 lies at the beginning and then you pulled them all apart, which like as an administrator, I love that. Kirk, would you like to give us an overview of your message and the main takeaways?
Yeah, I also started with the loneliness epidemic
Yeah.
and talked around that and really started to build out. I found this one was more of a teaching exercise of like, how do you go about building, like how do you move out of loneliness and isolation, and what does it look like to build friendship with other people? But then also a bit of a challenge towards the end of, it's not only about like your close friends, it's about the broader community that you're tied to. And so to even for people who live in the space of going, well, I've got my people and I don't need to be around other people, to understand the gift of the church in our lives, of being around the broader body of Christ and the benefits that come with that.
Yeah, that was a phrase that I have heard before. Like I've heard friends of friends or whatever say like, well, they're just not really my people, or, oh, these are my people.
Yeah.
Kind of you heard that thrown around here and there. I love this question. I would love to know what stood out to you most in your study or prep this week, or if there was anything you wish you could have spent more time on in your messages. Both of you I think you both went overtime with your messages.
Yeah.
Run out of time?
No, I didn't run out of time, but I definitely went overtime.
Yeah.
How far overtime?
This was probably the longest sermon I've preached here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What about you?
I was 46 minutes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Do you lose $1 on your pay every minute you're over?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's true.
That's too bad.
This was probably the longest one that I've written.
Yeah.
So I knew that going into it. I wrote a lot, and so I knew I needed to move fast. So it came in at 40 minutes.
Okay.
So, which is
For what it's worth, I didn't even notice the time. So unless I did, and that's why I asked you. So you both Was there anything that stood out to you, or?
For me, I would have loved to spend a little bit more time diving into the cord of 3 strands. I found it really interesting in the passage how he builds in this kind of one-on-one relationship. He's talking about like 2 are better than 1. And there's just kind of this progression of, I've got this one other person who's journeying with me. And then he drops in this line, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And I tried to figure out like, why is there that progression and why is there that sudden connection to this broader thing? And I would have liked to spend a little bit more time on that. And then there's a couple other things that I think are going to come out in the questions today.
Okay.
That I would have enjoyed spending some more time talking about.
How do you know? You never read the questions.
Well, because there was one person who came up to me after the service and showed me a question that they were sending in.
Okay.
And they said, "Is this question okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, it's great. It'll actually allow me to talk to one of the things I wanted to talk about, but didn't get a chance to."
Well, it's nice that you read their questions.
Blair, I trust your questions.
You shouldn't. I'm just kidding. All right. Daryl, was there anything that stood out to you or that you didn't get to spend as much time on?
Yeah, a couple of things. So one, the last part of the passage, which I talked about, surface level connection. That one is interesting. Mm-hmm. It kind of talks about this young person, this older person, and in that passage, I didn't really talk about this in the message. It's a tricky passage to translate. Is he talking about 2 or 3 people in this passage? And looking at it, seems like he's referring to 3 people. Kind of there's an older king who's foolish, and he's surpassed by a younger person who's kind of this rising star, and everything's great for him, but then he just gets surpassed by someone else. And I feel like there's so much there that we could just really pull apart and talk through just in terms of how we spend our time and our legacy and all that good stuff. So I feel like I could have spent a lot of time on that. And then I had a whole sport analogy that I worked on that ended up getting cut from my message.
So disappointing.
I know. All right. So whenever I can talk about sports, so in in the Premier League, in European football, soccer, as the rest of us call it, you can get relegated down. So if you're a bad team, you get kicked out of the league, which a lot of other sports, I've been told there's other teams that are very thankful that this doesn't happen to them. I won't mention names. But someone mentioned the Leafs to me the other day. But anyways, so this idea of like your whole team gets kicked down, you can't stay if you're a star player. And this whole idea of like, we need to understand how community works. Like we rise or fall by the community around us. It's not that we can just separate ourselves from the church community around us. We have to care for those around us. We can't just be a breakout star and just say, oh, if the other people could just get it together. It's like, those are your teammates. Like those are the people like you're playing the game with. Like you are not just a game, like you're doing life with, and you can't just say, oh, they have a problem. If you understand yourself as a real community, as a real team, hey, like you got to do this together. So anyways, that was a key point I worked really hard on during the week and did not find itself into.
He was very excited about that illustration.
And it turns out he is a team player.
Yeah,
he is a team.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
Kirk and Derek are so proud of you right now, Daryl. You drank the Kool-Aid, I think. I will not drink that Kool-Aid. No, that was a great analogy. I like that. I knew where you were going with it. I can put it together. It's great.
Perfect.
This is good. We're going in a good direction. So then why don't we go to our texted question? There was only one texted question, so I hope this is the one that you read.
From like this week, or are we going back to last
Well,
week?
I did realize that we jumped into our overviews before we did the last week one. Can we circle back to the last
Yeah, whatever you want. You're the
Okay,
host.
because
It's your show. It's your
all right,
show.
it's my show.
Do
I'm
what
going
you
to do it that way. So to the person who texted in last week, you have to watch to the end. All right, there was one question for this week that got texted in. It says, as we seek deeper relationships, what is a good way to ask the probing questions that still respect the balance between privacy and the need to be open with each other?
Yeah, that is the question. That is the question.
Thank you for texting it in.
Yeah, it's a great question because you do. I talked a lot about the importance of honesty in friendships and being open and bringing other people into your story. And then what does it look like to be someone who's encouraging to someone when they bring you into their story? Because it's nothing worse than you bringing someone into your story and them going, "Yeah, that's nice."
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And, so those are awkward moments,
Yeah.
but I think one of the things that we are wrestling with when we invite someone into our stories and we ask probing questions, you got to remember that one of the battles we fight against in our culture is shame. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why people don't want to talk about the deeper things of life is because they are actually carrying a lot of shame about the deeper things of their life. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you're going to experience a wall going up when you ask a probing question. Sometimes you are going to experience maybe even backlash where it's like, it's none of your business. Stay out of, like, it's just my own private business. You stay out of it. And quite often, that is a response really that's based out of shame. I don't want you to know the depths of the shame that I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. And so it is so important that you have grace, first of all, towards that person, that you understand that for whatever their reasons are, they don't want to have the probing question. Mm-hmm. And so you respect their boundaries around that, but keep praying for them, right? Because there might be things that you're seeing in their life that created the probing question in the first place. So keep praying for them, keep praying for the Spirit to work in their life, to show them the things that they need to see, and be ready when God does work in their life to keep walking with that person. Don't get angry with them. Don't get bitter because they don't want to talk to you about their deep issues of life. You got to give people the space for that. On the flip side, if somebody asks you a probing question, consider the source. Who's asking you the question? What's the motivation of this person? And if the motivation, like if you know this person enough to be able to go, you know what, the motivation is going to be pure. They care about me. Then I would just encourage you to not let shame control you. Like Jesus came and died on a cross, and our whole story is that we have to acknowledge we're weak.
Yeah.
Like that is the Christian story.
Yeah.
I'm weak and I need a savior.
Yeah.
So that does not just revolve around one prayer that you do once in your life. It is a lifestyle of recognizing your weakness and inviting other people into that and inviting God's grace and strength to come into your weakness. So, guard your own mind from reacting to a probing question and say, like, is it a shame issue that's holding me back from being honest with my friend? And that's just the devil's way of keeping things in secret so that you can't find the healing that you need in that issue of your life.
Yeah. Oh, we're pausing?
Oh, I feel so...
Is it live still, though?
No.
Oh.
I was hoping you wouldn't say we're pausing online.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did.
At the next opportunity to pause, we need to pause.
Oh, pause.
We are paused right now.
Okay.
We're having issues with the live stream. So we're going to go to a record. I'm going to put them together and we'll put them on.
Okay.
Did you miss all of the beginning or did you record it?
That's all.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
We're just having live streaming.
Okay.
So
I can totally bring it back without being awkward and saying, so we're back.
what we're going to do is we're actually just going to do a record onto the hard disk here.
'Kay.
And then live stream. So
Just tell us when. I don't want to say anything because I want to pick up where our thought got left off.
sorry.
No, that's okay.
And in 3, 2, 1.
I think that is helpful because sometimes even being the person who asks a probing question, like I know when I ask a probing question or I want to, my heart increases and
Oh, yeah.
because it's almost like a prep of what if they tell me the answers, am I ready to be there? But it's so much more it's so much more of what community is and what we're talking about today when you can it's putting yourself out there too, even to ask the probing questions.
Yeah, it is. And it's putting yourself out there. And it's not only just putting yourself out there in terms of taking that immediate risk, you're putting yourself out there for the journey of walking with that person if they decide to answer
Yes.
with honesty.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But I think that's what friendship is.
Yes.
I think this is the kind of thing that Jesus calls us to.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it's not just like we talked about surface level relationship. Like it's not just a surface level thing. I could talk all day long with people about last night's hockey game or whatever. But so what?
Yeah.
Honestly, so what? Like, what difference does
Read
it
my
make?
mind.
What difference does it make?
Exactly.
Right?
Right. In the lives of each of you. kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Daryl, in regards to asking probing questions and respecting boundaries?
Yeah, I think what Kirk said there is great. Just in terms of the idea of shame, there's a book called Crucial Conversations that's really helpful. It's more geared towards if there's conflict with, and it's kind of a business book, but it addresses this issue of if you're gonna have a crucial conversation, which this person's kind of having, probing questions, going a little bit deeper. One of the key things in that book it says is you want to make the conversation safe, and so in that's where you're communicating that they are able to go a little bit deeper, and again you have to respect the boundaries that you've been given. So if you don't have a really close relationship with that person, you should expect that you're going to have certain boundaries there, and that's good if you continue to walk with that person, and those boundaries are going to shift over time. And so it is a long journey that we have to be willing to walk with that person if you're trying to go deeper in that relationship.
Yep.
I love that.
Yeah.
We're talking about boundaries. So that's going to guide me to, I was going to save this question, but it just works because we're talking about boundaries. Here is a question. I feel like it's taboo, but maybe it's not taboo. Is it okay to have close relationships with someone of the opposite gender whom you are not married to?
Define close.
Okay. someone who's going to ask you a probing question and you are going to answer authentically. And that person may be available to journey. Perhaps they have their own experiences that are similar and can journey with you through that. Or even just someone that you can bring questions to or thoughts to. And even, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really don't like one size fits all formula answers to these kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Because I think there's so many variables on this kind of a situation. I think, let's make an assumption based on the nature of a question like that at least one of the individuals are married. Maybe both of them are married. So now it's no longer only about me and my friend. It's also, how is my relationship with that friend impacting my spouse?
Yes. Yeah.
And to understand that God has called me to be one, first of all, with my spouse. So if my spouse is concerned about that friendship at all, then it's a non-starter. Like you shouldn't be pursuing that level of closeness with someone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not to say that it shouldn't happen or can't happen either. Like I think that there are lots of times where you can have varying degrees of close friendships with someone of the opposite sex. It is about your heart posture. It's about respecting your spouse and each other's spouses. There's just a whole bunch of factors that kind of get brought together around.
Too many factors to say yes or no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even your own emotional health and spiritual health and relational health with your spouse all play a factor in it, right? Like if you are struggling in your marriage and you're looking for the companionship of a friend outside of your marriage, like that's probably not the wisest thing to do.
Yeah.
There's just a bunch of factors that you have to really take into consideration.
Yeah.
And with that, I would say in a situation like this, probably the wise thing would be is to make sure that you have good boundaries set in place.
Yeah.
Because by the very nature of this question, it's saying things could go wrong. There is potential for whether it is misunderstandings or romantic feelings end up developing, which, to be quite honest, romantic feelings can come when dealing with really sensitive issues. That's where a deep bond can end up forming if you're addressing really sensitive things. And it's kind of like people who go to war together, or they're in a really tense job, like police force or firefighter, like they're in these intense situations. So they kind of get like a brotherhood. Or so if you're having deep conversations, the person's not your spouse, you could end up forming a really deep relationship. And is that honoring to your spouse or to their spouse? So we need to be absolutely, as Kirk said, like there isn't a one size fits all. There are so many different contexts in which this is totally fine. But you should err on the side of having more boundaries than less, if at all possible. So
I think that the I have my own thoughts on it too, because
what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are, I think it's another one of those examples where, and I don't have anybody to blame for it. I just, for some reason in my Christian journey, that to me was like, no, you don't do that. It's a taboo thing. You just don't. So when I got in a serious relationship with my now husband, and I had I don't blame this on my personality. It's just the Cambridge girl to guy ratio was flawed. And so a lot of my friends were guys. So as soon as I started a serious relationship, it was like, bye. And I missed out on some really great friendships because I think that I thought that was supposed to be the case. The only close male friend I could have was my husband. And kind of living life and journeying, it was like, that kind of sucks because And the outlook that I kind of got on it, I was listening to a podcast with Jen Wilkin, and she's very close friends with JT English. They wrote a book together.
Yeah.
And they kind of talked about their friendship, but it was very much, and I was talking to other people about it, it was very much in the circle of church family, brother, sister,
Yep.
as scripture explains,
Yep.
your brothers and sisters in Christ. This is not an outside of that
Right.
situation, totally different.
Right. Yeah.
But they're journeying together as brothers and sisters in Christ, learning in ministry and that kind of thing. And her take was sort of, we need to be careful not to when you have love or friend feelings towards someone, we tend to sexualize something that's not sexualized, like brothers and sisters.
Yep.
A relationship between a brother and sister is not a sexual thing.
Right.
It's very, and
Yeah.
so why would we, in the context of biblical brother sister, if ever we should kind of emanate that, it would be in the church. However, she does talk a lot about spiritual maturity, and if you are someone who struggles in this, are you growing in that area? It's not, and she kind of talks about sort of your example of nuances, and there's factors, right? But she talks a lot about how you can miss out if you just draw that boundary, and then I do think that there's a massive boundary when it comes to going to someone else to talk about your marriage.
Yeah, I think I think that was where I was going to jump in. I think that you definitely do not want to be talking to someone of the opposite gender about your marriage.
Yeah.
That is that's just opening up a
Yeah.
whole can of worms that you do not want to open up.
Yeah, and I think if you are having if you do have a close friendship with people, like here we're talking about D groups, right? If you do have a close friendship with someone who's spiritually mature and in your church and they're married, if they're spiritually mature and in their church,
Right.
hopefully their marriage is such a big part of that your marriages end up kind of coming together as the friendship anyways.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think it happens in workplaces too, right? People build friendships with opposite sex in a workplace quite easily. And I remember the first time that I hired an assistant for me when I was working at Promise Keepers, and it came down to, it was a woman who was the best candidate for the role. And I remember sitting down at home with Shannon and saying, hey, I want to make sure you're okay with the reality that my assistant, the person who's going to work the closest with me every day, is going to be a woman. And so we talked through candidly between the two of us, what are the boundaries? What are the things that are being put in place so that, there are just some safety nets for everyone involved. And I wanted to honor and respect Shannon and her desires around that. And so we put a whole bunch of different things in place, and it was fine. It was great.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was just about to say, in some ways, what we're talking about here is kind of like in the workplace, where in the workplace, you'll have, in a good workplace, you end up having a familiarity between the people working there. So what that means is hey, you know each other, you know a little bit about each other's lives, and sometimes that familiarity can go too far, where you think you're closer friends you actually are. You kind of tease a little bit, and then you can actually find yourself in oh, I actually hurt this person's feelings, or I didn't respect kind of the chain of command or whatever it is. And it's maybe a little bit in the same thing of within the church life, where you can have familiarity, you can have kind of that brother sister, but you can go too far where you end up, for instance, I know of a church leader who got in trouble a couple years ago for this kind of became friends with a woman. They're kind of texting each other at night, and then someone found out, and they had to kind of deal with this at a church level of hey, you went from this familiarity kind of crossed a boundary at some level. And it's not a clearly defined biblical, it's not in the 10 Commandments, but can we all agree that there's a wisdom here that shouldn't happen? And the pastor, to his great credit, was we were friends, and it just went too far. At some point it did, and he had to reconcile that. And I actually thought it was a great illustration of how to walk it back from.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It was a great illustration.
Yeah, it is. Jen Wilkin kind of talked about the basic doctrines, and she said that we tend to, in the space where I was of absolutely not zero, no interaction. My friends are only females and my only man friend is my husband. They have overemphasized one at the expense of another. And her quote is that like that would be an example of that, an overemphasis of the doctrine of sin and an underemphasis on the doctrine of God and humanity and him creating us in his image. And then like she goes into talking about a firm grip on humanity. But anyway, that was that question. I had thoughts on it, but I wanted to save it for last, which I did not. Let's go to some more good ones. So I think it was you, Kirk, who talked about how we tend to be drawn to people who talk like us, look like us, think like us.
Yep.
Is there a downside to that? Were you describing it as like, hey, don't just be like that?
The downside is, again, no, it's not at all. Don't be like that. I think that's normal that you're drawn towards people who are like you.
Yeah.
The downside is there's a few downsides. One is if you limit yourself to that space, you are closing yourself off to the benefits of greater community. For instance, if you are in your 20s and you only want to hang out with people in your 20s, you are closing yourself off to the wisdom of people who are older than you.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a downside. You can end up in your own little kind of circle of thoughts around political issues or religious issues, and you're not expanding your thoughts or to other ideas around those issues because, well, we all think the same way, so we're all just going to stay in our little corner of the world and keep thinking the same way. So yeah, I think there are lots of obvious benefits to being around people that are just like you, but I think that there are some definite things to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't just limit ourselves to that space.
Yeah.
The other thing is you do tend to get very comfortable in that space when you're around people who are like you. Like there are a bunch of people that love to play golf, and the golf's the thing that brings them together, right? But if you were to say to them, how many conversations have you had about Jesus on the golf course? My hunch, at least of the guys that I've ever talked to, is, we don't really talk about that.
Yeah.
Why? Because golf is the thing that brought us together. So golf is the thing we talk about.
Right. Suddenly you're in a surface
level relationship, right? You're not. So I think that what the Bible would say to us is, use the golfing relationship as an entry point, but use it as an entry point to dive you into deeper community and deeper relationship with each other.
No, I absolutely love that. Is there anything to add to that, Daryl, or shall we? What do you? Yeah, it's nodding. It's a podcast.
It was a golf. It was a golf illustration. Daryl's like,
don't
that?
make me do golf.
Bad enough. Daryl had to do soccer.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. This is good because I'm going to bring up isolation. So Daryl, you talked about, you talked about isolation, but I think you both did, but you had brought in a concept of like by choice isolation versus not by choice. And I was like, that's so important. And I immediately went back to like having a newborn during COVID or even just like having my firstborn and like people give you space because they assume you're tired, but I had way too much space. Like I needed people so bad at that time that I was just I remember talking to the grocery clerk for like 20 minutes and she was like, can you go away now? And I was like, I just want to talk to an adult. Anyway, let's talk about some of that isolation of like, how people can tend to prefer it, but also how we can sometimes find ourselves in seasons where we're isolated not by choice. Maybe you can share a time in your life when you felt isolated, maybe by choice or not by choice, and maybe what brought you out again. Maybe it was a person, maybe it was the Lord providing.
Yeah. So sorry, I feel like you asked two questions there. So
what did I ask two questions? What was my friend? I don't remember.
Do you want me to share a story or to adjust the idea?
What do you want to do?
I'll do both. Okay,
right.
so
Solution.
So I wanted to talk about this idea of isolation because there's two sides of it. For some, they might prefer isolation, but I did want to address that there could be some who are listening who like, oh, I feel isolated, but I don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I share that illustration of like, a mom, especially when they just had a newborn, can feel quite isolated.
Yeah.
Not that newborn gives any sense of company with you. That is
None.
not
0%.
and for so many different reasons, people can feel isolated. Maybe they're in a new country or in a new city or whatever it is. And so I want to address that because I think the passage is speaking to those who are preferring isolation. I think that's what the passage is referring to. But for anyone who finds themselves, whether they prefer or they just found themselves in a time of isolation, to recognize the importance of finding our community, of finding a space where you can connect with others. And it does take work. I want to recognize that what this passage is saying, like if you're feeling that way and it feels off, there's a reason why, like you shouldn't be in that spot, and it wants to move you from there. So sometimes scripture agrees with you of how you're feeling right now. If you feel off, it's like, yeah, you should feel off.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you move from there? So the passage talks about connecting with others, of having that far deeper community. And I just want to encourage those who are feeling isolated. I mean, we work really hard as a church to have a space where no matter your situation, that you would find community here. That's why we have serve teams and discipleship groups and women's ministry and men's ministry and youth ministry, like seniors ministry. No matter like where you find your demographic, we would have space for you there. We would have different times to meet. Honestly, it's why we work so hard to have online ministry, is because we recognize there's some people who are on the road all the time, or they just can't leave their apartment. And so let's have community at some level that would want you to engage beyond just watching, but engage at a deeper level. So we'll leverage whatever we can. So I want people to hear that, of like, this is what we're striving for. So if you reach out saying, I'm looking for a community, we'll respond. We'll try to drive you in. And that's really important. Yeah. So, I mean, I can share a time. I think the other part of your question is like when I felt isolated. I think probably one time where I felt isolated was when I was in college. There was a time there where it just felt like everyone at college was different than me and didn't understand me.
So you were the type of isolated where you were in a room full of people. But you were still feeling isolated.
And I felt alone. And I decided to.
Did you understand you?
Did I understand myself? When I was 20, I probably didn't.
That's what I was going to say. I didn't understand me when I was 20.
I still don't understand myself. So I end up connecting with some guys who, a few of them are like still like really good friends.
Yeah.
Like the other day, I was like still texting with a good friend I formed in college. And I think he felt a little bit on the outside too. And we started talking, like we're actually like into the same thing, except he liked NASCAR, which is lame. But anyways, so you end up forming connections, and that took work. That was like, okay, I want to have deeper connection. And those who I thought I would connect with, I didn't. And those who I think felt a little bit on the outside, I'm like, well, then we're going to be a group. We're going to hang out.
I can see how you would have thought going to Bible college, you would have found it faster, found those connections faster, maybe because everybody's there. 90% of them are there for the same reasons. Maybe they're not. Maybe I know nothing about Bible college.
There is a different nuance at Bible college.
Okay.
But that might not make great radio. So
we'll save that for another. Very controversial. Do you have any stories that you could share, Kirk, or maybe thoughts even? You're allowed to.
In terms of feeling isolated?
Yeah, of times when you felt isolated and how God
I honestly think that being in any type of leadership role is one of the most isolating things.
Interesting.
You're around people all the time.
Yeah.
But there is this thing where you have the title.
Okay.
And because you have the title, people perceive you differently.
Okay.
Than even sometimes who you really are. And so I find quite often people don't know how to interact with someone who has a certain title
Yeah.
associated with their name. And so it has been very easy to feel isolated in leadership roles. One of the great challenges I had for many years was I did a lot of traveling for my work. And in the traveling, I felt isolated all the time.
Yeah.
Sitting in hotel rooms by myself, very isolating. Even when I was out doing things and meeting with people, there was still this sense of I'm only going to see you for a night, and then won't see you again for a year.
Yeah.
And so it's very isolating. And then when I was home, I didn't have any desire to hang out with friends because all I wanted to do was spend time with my family.
Yeah.
Because it was like I'm with my family or I'm on the road. Like
Yeah.
that was my life for 20 years. So it became it was very, very isolating when you're in that space, you know. And I think that you can also make the choice to be isolating by being in those environments. Like you can, like in any of our sites, someone can come and sit in a Sunday morning service and think, yeah, I'm in community because I'm at church on Sunday morning.
Yeah. Singing with my
church family,
Yeah.
and therefore I'm in community.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, like, that's not the vision of community that God had in mind.
Yeah.
That is like an entry point into community, but it's not the fullness of community that God had in mind. So you can make the choice to stay isolated by just showing up for church on Sunday morning. You have to make intentional decisions, as Daryl was talking about all the different ways to connect.
Right.
You have to make intentional decisions. And even if you say to me, Kirk, but I'm not a people person. I don't want to hang out with people. My comment is, do you want to be a disciple of Jesus who is growing to love others? Because if you want to be a disciple of Jesus who is growing and loving others the way Jesus has called you to love others, then you got to be around the others.
Yeah. Can't one another without another.
Can't one another without the other. So you have to enter into it in order to grow to be the person God's called you to be as one who loves somebody else.
And oh, you will grow.
Oh, yes, you will.
Yes. I love that. Why don't we, this week was one of those weeks where the questions just flowed through my brain and I had a ton. We only got to hit a few. But that's okay because what really matters is answering the listeners' questions. And we did have one from last week. So I wanted to ask it at the beginning, but I forgot like a terrible host. So we're going to turn a bit of a corner here and address this last question before we wrap up. It goes like this. Long story short, that's how you know it's a big question. I have had conversations with people who hide behind the part of justice will be made by God one day. And they sit in the comfort and move around life as if there was absolutely nothing they could do to help those in need. These are Christians. I can definitely see that I am bothered by this and that I need to bring it to Jesus. I'm working on that. How could I let this go? I know I can't change people. Thanks.
But I want to change people.
But I want to change people.
Here's one of the things that I learned this kind of principle early on. You have to know that you don't know everything in someone else's life.
Okay.
You don't know what justice issues somebody's involved in. You don't know the things that they are giving money to every month. You don't know the things that they are interacting with other people around.
Or praying about.
Yeah. What I find happens is I get passionate about my justice issue, and I expect everyone else to share the same passion I have about the exact same issue that I'm passionate about.
Right.
And so don't make that mistake of assuming that because someone doesn't care about your justice issue to the same level you care about your justice issue, that it means they don't care about justice issues.
Yeah. Was it you or maybe it was Daryl? I don't remember. It was one of the teachers. And you said that you can't assume that your justice battle is the war.
Right.
It's a battle. There's a whole bunch of battles in the war, right?
Yeah.
I can see how that would be agitating, but I think that your answer clarifies and brings some reality to the
and
question.
Now, I mean, there is a reality where somebody might just generally not care about
Yeah.
any justice issues.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I think in that kind of a situation, that's just about being a friend to someone and, you know, praying together and encouraging each other towards things.
And patience. I think
Yep.
patience is involved in there too, which
Yep.
is a fruit of the Spirit. Anything to add, Daryl?
Yeah, I think through this, I mean, part of it is just back to what Kirk said, is you might not fully know what's going on in their mind and what they are passionate about. And part of this could be asking some questions to clarify, because when it comes to a justice issue, they might just see it slightly different.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have some friends. We're in a text group, and you know, it's each person's responsibility once in a while to say something that's controversial, so we all argue. Right? And so once in a while, I have a good friend, like he'll say something like, "Hey, I think of this on a war that's going on right now," and the other person will jump in, and he'll be like, "Well, I don't," you know, and he'll kind of give his explanation. I'm like, you guys like both agree, right, on like so many key things. You're arguing on some nuance here of how we should feel about this, how we should think about this, and how as Christians we should respond. But again, it's all through text, and you sometimes misunderstand each other. But here's the thing, like in the conversation, someone might be passionate as well. They just have a different perspective of I get your issue, but the real issue behind that one is this. And you need to hear that to understand where they're coming from. And you might still disagree. You might still say, "Oh, I think you're missing it. I think you're missing my heart behind the thing that we're talking about." But this is the thing of dealing with others and understanding how complex some justice issues are. Sometimes the world is much bigger and broader, and what you can do in that conversation is see a fuller and bigger picture of how we should engage. And so I find often that ends up being the case, unless that they don't care about what's going on. They're just viewing it from a different perspective.
Right.
So asking those questions and being curious, I think, helps, at least in the relationship.
I love that.
Yeah.
Your text group sounds like extended family dinner. There's always one person. Anyways, I'm sure I'm not the only one. To the listeners who do text in questions, this is an example of how, if you do text in a question, we will get to it. So don't stop texting questions in. I would love to leave the mic open for each of you to leave your listeners with any last thoughts or encouragement for this week.
I would encourage everyone to think about the people that God has brought into your life, and just do something this week to encourage them. Do something just to say, to acknowledge the blessing that they are in your life, because that's really the big idea of this whole conversation on community, is to see the blessing that community can be. So actually step back from the busyness of your life and consider the blessing that the community of people around you is to you.
I love that. Anything to encourage, Daryl, or thoughts?
Yeah. It was encouraging after the message on Sunday to have a few people come up and say that they want to get more plugged in at Forward. And I just want to continue to encourage those who maybe are thinking the same thing, but just haven't done it yet, to reach out. We have a whole new semester coming up. We're going to launch this on the 31st, where we'll share our semester brochure of different classes and events and opportunities that are coming up. And as I always say, these are more than classes and events. These are discipleship opportunities. And so I want to encourage our listeners to take advantage of that this is where community can be found, is within the church. And there are opportunities that are currently happening and that are coming up really, really soon. And so that's my hope, is that by the end of this year, we'll feel closer and more connected with each other.
I love that. And this is a great podcast topic to promote D groups text groups to our number 226-212-7117 if you are looking to join a discipleship group or even start one. That's also an option. Membership, text member to our number as well. I think you talked, Kirk, or maybe it was Daryl, talked a bit about becoming members of a church and what that kind of opportunity provides for community in your life, right? So that's something as well. Also, if you're just having trouble making friends, maybe you're having trouble making friends, we have an online equipped class called How to Listen Well. Hey, that's a good place to start.
Daryl will be your friend.
And Daryl will be your friend.
We'll hang out.
Carve out 45 minutes.
Actually, and I'll say this too, because I didn't say this on Sunday.
Okay.
Because it was way too big of an audience. So I'm
Okay.
going to say it to the smaller audience of our
dear.
podcast.
Okay.
This better not go viral.
Oh, man. I'm so excited right now.
So, in just a few weeks, 1 block away from my house,
Okay.
Twisted Treats Ice Cream has moved in Paris to 1 block away from my house. So, if you and your family are up for some ice cream at any point this summer, stop by Twisted Treats. Let me know you're coming. You can hang out in my backyard. We'll hang out together and have some community together.
This is a big deal. You heard it here, house party at Kirk's. That's what I heard, right? That's what you heard.
That's what I heard.
I should check with Shannon before we do that.
Oh, no. Oh, Shannon's going to get so mad at you. No, I'm just kidding. You're going to be the one to clean the backyard. That's probably what she's going to say.
Probably,
Well, you're in
yeah.
charge of it then. That's what I would say. Well, thank you for listening. Next week we have, I believe, week 8, and it is our message is called Meaningful Worship, Meaningless Words. Ooh, this is going to be a doozy. I'm excited. So remember, text in your questions anytime. Doesn't have to be on Sunday. We love getting questions, mostly me. And we'll just check in with you guys next week. Get excited. We'll see you later.